Good afternoon. You are tuned in to WRFG 89.3 FM in Atlanta. My name is Diane Mathowitz, and I'm a co-host of this program, The Labor Forum. Seated next to me in the studio is Paul McLennan, also co-host of this program. We are so happy to be able to be with you again on the first day of June 2015. The opinions that are expressed on The Labor Forum are not necessarily those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers here at WRFG, but do represent very much the mission of this station, which is to bring the voices of those that are impacted by all of the policies of governments and corporations, and often don't get their opportunity to speak about their own issues to the public. So we have a great show today. We have some really terrific guests coming in. Those of you who are listening to us on your computer, thank you so much for doing that, and we will be, of course, videotaping this. It is being streamed live on the on YouTube, and it will be archived there as well. You'll be able to go and watch the program yourself. So let's start first with the labor headlines. Oh, I gotta go get something, but I'll get it during the break. I have so many shout outs to workers who over the last 2 days have complimented the presenters here, the co-hosts here at the Labor Forum, and have told us how much they enjoy the program. And I want to make their names known. I'm going to shout them out, but I left a piece of paper in the other room, but I'll get it. All right, so here are the labor headlines for June 1st, 2015. There was huge media coverage of the arrests of FIFA officials in Zurich, Switzerland on charges of corruption, wire fraud, racketeering, and money laundering a few days ago. Football, or soccer as it is called in the U.S., is the world's most popular sport and brings in billions of dollars to team owners. Millions of workers are avid fans, attending games and buying merchandise. FIFA controls the location of the World Cup, and the behind-the-scenes machinations that take place in the bidding process are well known. While the alleged bribery payments made to secure Qatar, a small, wealthy desert kingdom with no tradition of soccer, as the site of the 2022 World Cup, went mentioned numerous times in recent days, what was glaringly missing was any accountability for the deaths of at least 1,200 workers who are constructing the stadium's infrastructure, hotels, and other buildings needed to host the event. Some 94% of Qatar's workforce is immigrant labor, totaling an estimated 1.5 million workers. They are recruited under a program known as kafala, which means an employer is responsible for their living as well as working conditions. The workers' passports are held by the employers. They cannot leave the country without an exit permit supplied by the company. Without an ID from the boss, they are subject to arrest if they leave the work camp. These workers have no right to organize a union or collectively bargain. They live in squalid conditions, many men to a small room, with wall-to-wall mats on the floor or bunk beds. Camps may not have electricity or running water, functioning sewage systems, or garbage collection. Workers can go months without pay, reportedly some for a year. Some 400,000 of these immigrant workers are from Nepal. When the devastating earthquake shook Nepal last month, killing at least 8,000 people, Qatar, citing the tight construction deadlines for the 2022 World Cup, refused to allow Nepali workers leave to go home to check on their families and mourn dead relatives. After pressure from the government of Nepal, 500 exit visas were granted. It is estimated that some 1,200 workers have died in the last 2 years alone, with 157 of them from Nepal and 279 from India, just in 2014. Oh, I'm sorry, that figure is just for in 2014. FIFA officials were already made aware of the slave labor type conditions that exist in Qatar before they awarded the 2022 games to that country. So far, despite demands from international labor organizations and human rights groups to attach labor standards to the bidding process, the operating principle continues to be the winner is the highest bidder. Now an update from efforts by the United Auto Workers to represent workers at the Chattanooga Volkswagen plant. You may remember a little over a year ago, the UAW lost a very close election in the face of a multi-million-dollar campaign by a number of national anti-union forces such as Grover Nordquist's Americans for Tax Reform. State and elected federal officials, including Tennessee Senator Bob Corker, stated the plant would close if the union won. The German-based company has something called a Works Council at all its plants worldwide, which determine local working conditions, scheduling, and safety, and the Chattanooga plant has implemented that process, which allows worker groups that can verify a certain percentage of membership to engage in these meetings. Of the 1,500 hourly workers, UAW Local 32 has signed up 816, clearly more than 50%. Something called the American Council of Employees, a new formation emanating from the anti-union Southern Momentum Group, which fought against union representation last year, has submitted 316 members from both hourly and salaried employees. Its lawyer was the spokesperson for Southern Movement, and he has described the group as, quote, an anti-union union, close quote. The UAW is pressing Volkswagen to recognize Local 32 as the collective bargaining agent for the workers, able to set wages and benefits. Interestingly enough, the board of directors of Volkswagen has 50% labor representation, and the newly elected interim chair is Berthold Huber, the former head of the German trade union IG Metall, who supported the UAW in the election by writing a letter to the Chattanooga workers. And lastly, the Atlanta North Georgia Labor Council and the state AFL-CIO are encouraging workers and all those concerned about the negative implications of the fast-track legislation and the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement to make their views known to congressional elected officials on Wednesday, June 3rd. The phone number is 1-855-712-8441, and for more information there is a website, www.nofasttrack.com, and that telephone number is there for your information. And that's our labor headlines for today.
Okay, thanks, Diane. 4 years ago this week, on June 2nd, 2011, the Alabama State Legislature passed House Bill 56, the harshest, most anti-immigrant law in the country, even worse than Arizona's Senate Bill 1070 passed the year before. It legalized racial profiling by requiring police to try to determine a suspect's immigration status during the course of a lawful stop, detention, or arrest, given a reasonable suspicion that the person is an immigrant. In addition, this legislation became an extraordinary racist attempt to regulate every aspect of the lives of immigrants in Alabama. The law denied undocumented immigrants from receiving state or local public benefits such as unemployment benefits, forbid them from enrolling in public colleges, barred them from applying for or soliciting work, outlawed harboring and transporting undocumented immigrants, forbid renting undocumented persons' property or knowingly employing them within Alabama, called for a citizenship check during voter registration, required all state businesses to use the federal E-Verify system when hiring, and asked officials at public K-12 schools to determine the immigration status of their students and parents. The impact of such a law is severe. Latino women have been particularly negatively impacted by House Bill 56, making it even more difficult for them to report domestic abuse or seek refuge in the court system when being victimized. In one case, a victim of domestic violence went to the courthouse seeking a protection order so that she could distance herself from her abuser. The clerk informed her that if she proceeded with the case, she would be reported to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Another example of how House Bill 56 is deterring women from reporting crimes or seeking help is an Alabama judge who said he might have to report to ICE any person who asked for an interpreter because such a request would be a red flag. Being the strictest anti-illegal immigration law to date, under House Bill 56, undocumented persons are unable to interact with the government in any way and for any purpose, effectively making an entire class of people into non-persons in the eyes of the law. On October 12, 2011, workers, students, and small business owners in Alabama gave lawmakers a taste of what society would look like without them. They led a Day Without Immigrants action that involved student walkouts and wildcat strikes, shuttering at least 40 businesses and slowing operations in half a dozen poultry plants. More than 2,000 mostly undocumented workers shut down the processing lines and butchering room floors in Albertville in the state's northeast corner. Although a majority of the poultry plant workers are Latinos, a few white and black workers also came off the line for the day in a show of solidarity with immigrant workers, said Jose Contreras, a Dominican immigrant. He's the owner of a small grocery store and restaurant in Albertville who shut down his business for the day. Plants closed included Diamond Food, Tyson, and Wayne Farms, which is a union shop. Rick Major, Secretary-Treasurer of Food and Commercial Workers, Local 1995, said, "We had many members calling into work and saying that they needed to pick up their children at school because of fears associated with the law." A class action lawsuit was filed by a coalition of immigrant rights groups, charging that Alabama's extreme anti-immigrant law is unconstitutional in that it unlawfully subjects people living in Alabama, including countless U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, to unlawful search and seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment. The lawsuit also said that Alabama's action interferes with federal power and authority over immigration matters in violation of the U.S. Constitution. In August 2012, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals blocked most of the challenged provisions of Alabama's House Bill 56 and Georgia's House Bill 87. Specifically, the court blocked provisions of the bill that required immigration verification of newly enrolled K-12 students, finding that it would interfere with children's constitutional right to education, and blocked registration and contract provisions. The court also issued a narrow ruling allowing the Show Me Your Papers provisions of House Bill 56 and House Bill 87 to remain in or go into effect, but leaving open the possibility of future challenges on civil rights or due process grounds. And in October 2014, the state of Alabama agreed that it would not publish the scarlet letter lists of undocumented individuals who appear in court in public. The legislation passed in Arizona, Alabama, Georgia's own House Bill 87, and other states have been part of a wave of anti-immigrant attacks in the country, particularly in the South. These attacks have also come at a time of record deportations by the Obama administration. In fiscal year 2013 alone, the figure was 438,421 persons. It is not a coincidence that the language and intent of these bills are so similar to the South's Jim Crow laws. Alabama, in particular, was the scene of some of the most bitter and violent struggles against white supremacy and these unjust laws during the Black Freedom Movement. African Americans were successful in overthrowing apartheid segregation with a massive organized movement. As we have witnessed, especially here in Georgia, the same kind of massive movement that the Latino community has already built and continues to build is necessary in order for Latinos to finally attain their freedom and human rights in this country.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to take a brief moment here for a message from WRFG, and then we're going to come back with our two very special guests, Carlos Rosero and Sheila Gruner, who are going to speak to us about the conditions of Afro-Colombians. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Labor Forum here on WRFG 89.3 FM. Co-host Diane Mathewitz and Paul McClellan. McLennan, sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied, I guess, again today, are going to be interviewing our two guests who are seated here at the desk. And we have Carlos Rosero, welcome. And he is a founder of Black Communities Process and the Secretariat of the National Afro-Colombian Authority. And he is here in the United States for a short visit, and we want to welcome him to the airwaves of WRFG. Translating for him is Sheila. Is it Gruner? Gruner.
Mm-hmm.
And where do you live?
Ontario, Canada.
Ontario, Canada. She is a professor and activist who's worked with the Black Communities Process since the 1990s. We want to welcome you to our program as well.
Thank you so much.
All right, so Sheila's going to be interpreting for Carlos. And so the first question I have is about what brought Carlos here. My understanding is that he was invited to be a speaker at the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists Congress, which was held in Chicago just a few days ago. And I would like to know what prompted, or what is the relationship between his organization and the CBTU.
Entonces pregunta por qué llegaste acá, hace referencia al Congreso del CBTU, entonces quiere saber cuál es la conexión entre las organizaciones. ¿Sí?
Bueno, gracias por permitirnos estar. Nosotros fuimos invitados con un grupo de otros compañeros afrocolombianos, entre ellos sindicalistas, a la conferencia anual del CBTU a conversar sobre la situación de los afrocolombianos y el proceso de paz que adelanta el gobierno colombiano con las Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, FARC, ¿sí?, que está desarrollándose en este momento en La Habana.
Thanks so much for the invite to the program, first off. We were invited with other organizations to participate, and along with other people that came to the Congress as well attended Congress. But we went with other Afro-Colombian organizations to talk about the current peace process underway between the government of Colombia and the FARC, which are the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the guerrilla group, in which these peace dialogues are taking place in Havana, Cuba right now.
Y básicamente lo que compartimos con ellos es que los afrocolombianos han sido duramente golpeados en medio del conflicto armado interno. Sus territorios han sido objeto de un sinnúmero de violaciones a los derechos humanos. Muchas de las crisis que se están desarrollando, que tiene ese proceso de negociación, están ocurriendo en zonas de comunidad negra, y que entonces para nosotros es incomprensible que la gente negra no haya sido escuchada como pueblo en esas conversaciones de paz, y que no se haya constituido un grupo de trabajo de las partes para discutir los derechos de los indígenas, los negros, los afrocolombianos, los negros y afrocolombianos, los raizales y la gente de origen gitano en Colombia.
So, first off, the Afro-Colombian communities have been deeply affected by the internal armed conflict in Colombia. The territories of Afro-descendant people have been come under fire. There's been extensive violations of human rights due to the conflict, and this has systematically and very particularly affected Afro-Colombian communities. And it's quite incredible that in the whole process of peace talks currently underway, that there isn't a particular recognition for this. We're asking for a working group to be established so that some of these issues can be addressed within the current peace talks, and we've asked specifically for this working group or committee or commission to be set up that will represent the interests not only of the Afro-Colombian communities, but the other ethnic groups that have been recognized in Colombia that are specifically affected by the conflict, including Indigenous people, Raizal, Roma, which is another word for, the pejorative term used for gypsies, the pejorative term was gypsies before, but Roma people, they're recognized within the Constitution. So the idea is to establish a commission or working group that will represent the interests and the perspectives of these underrepresented groups in the peace process.
Y en esta gira lo que buscamos es ganar condiciones para que muchos sectores en Estados Unidos apoyen estas demandas y se logre que esas delegaciones sean recibidas y se constituya ese grupo de trabajo de tal manera que en el largo plazo se logre romper una larga cadena de discriminaciones que termina generando mayores niveles de exclusión, racismo para indígenas, afrocolombianos, raizales y gitanos.
Right, so the whole idea is that, with the establishment of this working group, actually this tour itself was to speak about these issues, raise awareness in the United States, for example, so that pressure can be sort of asserted on the government in FARC so that they will accept this idea of establishing a working group. And the whole idea is that in the long term, we'll be able to break the cycle of the ongoing exclusions and racism that have been sort of endemic in the country.
Finalmente, una de las preocupaciones mayores que tenemos en este punto es que en el marco del conflicto hemos sido duramente golpeados, pero cuando se firme y se implementen los acuerdos de paz, nuestros territorios van a ser objeto de mayores presiones de parte de compañías multinacionales, fundamentalmente compañías mineras que pretenden acceder a los recursos naturales, especialmente el oro que está en nuestros territorios.
So within the framework of the conflict, there's a lot of interest at stake and underway in the country. So the peace process, one of our big concerns is that there will be even more pressures from the outside that come to bear on the realities facing our communities, particularly pressures from transnational companies that have interest in accessing natural resources such as gold in our territory. So we're particularly concerned about that and want to make sure that people are aware that there are threats or the implications of the peace process without dealing with the rights of Afro-Colombians and other underrepresented groups in the country if that doesn't take place.
Can I ask a question very specifically? Many people in the United States are not aware of the tremendous amount of military aid and funding that the U.S. government has given to the right-wing governments in Colombia through Plan Colombia. I was wondering if Carlos would want to comment a little bit about that, about the kind of how this has helped promote the repression and the violence in the areas where Afro-Colombians live.
Bueno, dice que mucha gente en Estados Unidos no entiende realmente los efectos del apoyo militar a través de Plan Colombia y pregunta qué impacto ha tenido sobre el conflicto interno ese tipo de apoyo desde Estados Unidos en Colombia.
Mucho impacto. Plan Colombia ha tenido, creo que dos facetas, una faceta militar y una faceta en términos sociales. La militar también incluía todos los programas relativos a las fumigaciones que han impactado enormemente los territorios de la gente negra y la gente indígena en Colombia.
So first off, there has been a great deal of impact of this sort of external funding coming from the states through Plan Colombia to Colombia. And he spoke of two phases, or two elements, two components. One's a military component and the other would be a social component. Within the military component, this is included, beyond the obvious in terms of the military, it's included fumigations, and fumigations of the coca plants, coca crops, that have really affected the territories of Afro-descendant people.
Nosotros vimos por efectos de las fumigaciones a las avionetas rociar o descargar sus tóxicos en la ensenada de Tumaco, por ejemplo, o en cultivos de comunidades en la zona de Guapi, en la zona de Tumaco, en el Chocó, en Caquetá, en Putumayo, empobreciendo mucho más a la gente y degradando más los ecosistemas en Colombia.
So, we've seen the small planes fly overhead. They've flown overhead and released the toxic substances that end up, basically falling on our communities. He cites, this has been a real problem in Tumaco. There's another community called Wapi, it's, you know, it doesn't just affect the coca crops, it affects the general, you know, cultivations that people have for eating.
It goes in the water.
You know, it goes in the water,
air.
it goes everywhere, and so they've actually exacerbated conditions of poverty, which has basically led to increased poverty in both Indigenous and Afro-descendant communities. So all through the Chocó area, this has been a big issue.
Afortunadamente, en las últimas semanas se tomó la decisión de no seguir fumigando más en Colombia con glifosfato después de muchos años y de una larga historia de destrucción que difícilmente vamos a olvidar y que se puede difícilmente resarcir en poco tiempo.
So he also spoke in what he last said about you know, obvious environmental impacts of the fumigations. But he said, you know, in recent weeks the decision has been made finally after a lot of struggle and a lot of effort to stop the fumigations with glyphosate, which has been the toxic substance that has been, you know, Roundup, right, has been used on the crops. And you know, obviously there's some real environmental implications with the fumigations, and now we're going to be looking at what we can do in terms of rescuing these areas.
Yo soy del Pacífico y en mi territorio las fumigaciones desplazaron a miles de afrocolombianos.
So I'm from the Pacific Coast, and I can say clearly, you know, that the fumigations have actually led to the displacement of thousands of Afro-Colombian families.
Y como era una política medio irracional, ¿sí? Entonces fumigaban en un lado y los cultivadores de coca pues se iban para otros. Eso hizo que la zona nuestra se llenara de cultivos de coca para fines ilícitos.
And you know, you can actually see what the clear kind of process was, where, you know, if fumigations took place in one area and people were displaced, those that were cultivating coca crops would just end up moving to another place and replanting, because that, you know, they needed to do that. They needed it was a basic income. And so what was happening was that in the entire area it was becoming all affected by the cultivations of coca crops as well as the fumigations.
I am so sorry. We have to close this interview, but I want to let our listeners know that if you stay tuned this afternoon or later this evening to RAP, Revolutionary African Perspectives, there'll be a full hour interview with Carlos about this situation. And I also want to, before we close the interview, to ask if there are any places where our listeners can find out how they either can be of assistance or get more information. Because as I said, most people are not aware of the relationship of the United States to this ongoing situation in Colombia.
Pregunta dónde puede conseguir más información a los temas mencionados.
Bueno, nosotros tenemos una página que es www.renacientes.org.
So we have a website that you can access by www.renacientes, which is RENACIENTES.org.
I'll say that one more time.
So www.renacientes.org.
Well, I really want to thank you both for being on air, and I know this was a really short interview, and so I hope that listeners will tune in again at this afternoon following Just Peace and for Revolutionary African Perspectives. Thank you so much, and best of struggle in achieving victory.
Muchas gracias por haber venido y mucha suerte en la noche.
Bueno, gracias a todos los que luchan por un mundo mejor.
So, and thank you, and to all who are struggling for a better world.
Gracias.
Gracias.